Ray Harryhausen created miracles. Critics called them childish. Barbarella bombed. Now it's a feminist icon. Vincent Price scared nobody. Decades later, he's worshipped. Today, we're counting down 15 fantasy disasters of the 60s that became masterpieces. The films that lost money, got savaged by critics, and somehow became the most influential cult classics in cinema history. Let's dive in.
What are you saying? To be right and lose couldn't possibly be right.
Camelot, 1967. Warner Brothers adapted the Broadway musical into a 3-hour epic that tested everyone's patience. Richard Harris played King Arthur. Vanessa Redgrave was Guinevere. Joshua Logan directed with zero sense of pacing. The box office was a disaster. The stage show worked because theater audiences expected musical numbers and theatrical presentation. The film felt stagey and endless. Logan couldn't translate Broadway magic to cinema. Beautiful music from Lerner and Loewe got buried under bloated runtime and static camera work. Critics destroyed it. Audiences stayed away. But the soundtrack became a massive success. If Ever I Would Leave You and One Brief Shining Moment endured as classics. The Kennedy administration's association with Camelot gave the film unexpected cultural relevance after JFK's assassination. The movie failed, but the music and mythology survived. Fantastic Voyage, 1966. A miniaturized crew travels inside a human body to destroy a blood clot in the brain. The concept was brilliant. The execution won 2 Academy Awards for special effects and art direction. But box office was only modest despite the innovation. The practical effects showing the inside of the human body were psychedelic and groundbreaking. Red and white blood cells, the heart pumping, the inner ear. Everything looked alien and beautiful. Raquel Welch in a wetsuit became iconic imagery. Isaac Asimov wrote the novelization that became more famous than the film. The science was questionable even in 1966. The ending where they had to escape before returning to normal size raised logic problems Asimov complained about. But the visual creativity was undeniable. Fantastic Voyage influenced Inner Space and every body journey film since. It deserved bigger cultural impact than it received initially. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. Mario Bava made Italian science fiction horror on a budget smaller than most television episodes. Astronauts land on a hostile planet. Their dead crewmates rise and attack. The survivors discover an ancient alien shipwreck with giant skeletal remains. Sound familiar? Ridley Scott admitted Planet of the Vampires directly influenced Alien's production design. The derelict spacecraft, the giant alien skeleton, the atmosphere of dread on a hostile world. Bava did it first with practically no money and pure visual creativity. Limited US distribution meant almost nobody saw it in 1965. Italian horror fans appreciated it, but mainstream audiences never discovered it. Decades later, horror scholars and Alien fans realized what Bava accomplished. Gothic horror atmosphere meets space opera on the smallest budget imaginable. Planet of the Vampires became recognized as Bava's science fiction masterpiece. The Mask of the Red Death, 1964. Roger Corman made his most artistic Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. Vincent Price played Prince Prospero, sheltering nobles from plague while the peasants die outside. The production design was gorgeous. The color cinematography was stunning, and drive-in audiences stayed away because it was too arty. Corman shot it in England with bigger budget and more time than his usual productions. The result was the most visually beautiful film he ever made. Price delivered one of his best performances. The allegory about death coming for everyone regardless of wealth and power was handled seriously. But box office was modest. Horror fans wanted straightforward scares. Corman delivered philosophical meditation on mortality disguised as horror film. Critics finally praised Corman for attempting something ambitious. The Mask of the Red Death's reputation grew over decades as Corman's masterpiece within his Poe cycle. The Last Man on Earth, 1964. Vincent Price starred in the first film adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, Italian production with limited U.S. release. Matheson hated it so much he used a pseudonym in the credits. Critics found it slow and depressing, and it influenced every zombie movie that followed. Price plays the last human survivor in a world where everyone else became vampire-like creatures. He spends days killing them and nights barricaded in his house. The tone is bleak and lonely. No action heroics, just survival and despair. Audiences in 1964 wanted monster movie thrills, not existential horror. George Romero admitted The Last Man on Earth directly inspired Night of the Living Dead. The template for zombie apocalypse survival came from this forgotten film. Later adaptations with Charlton Heston and Will Smith were more successful, but the original remained most.
Faithful to Matheson's novel, despite his disowning it. The Sword and the Stone, 1963, Disney's King Arthur animation was released during the studio's uncertain period after Walt Disney's death. Box office disappointed. Critics called it minor Disney work compared to Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. The story meandered. The animation was beautiful, but the narrative felt incomplete. Young Arthur being trained by Merlin through magical transformations had charm. Mad Madam Mim's wizard duel with Merlin was delightful. Higitus Figitus was catchy, but the film felt like setup without payoff. Arthur pulls the sword and becomes king. Then credits roll. No real conclusion or character arc completion. The Raven, 1963. Roger Corman adapted Edgar Allan Poe's poem into a comedy about feuding wizards. Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre chewed scenery magnificently. Young Jack Nicholson appeared in an early role. Critics expected serious horror and got campy fun instead. The film was played completely for laughs. Price and Karloff's wizard duel was delightful silliness. Laurie's cowardly magician stole scenes. The tone was completely wrong for audiences expecting gothic Poe horror. Box office was modest because nobody knew what they were getting. But The Raven became the most entertaining film in Corman's Poe cycle. The actors were clearly having fun. The humor worked. Decades later, audiences appreciated what Corman attempted, taking Poe's title and creating something completely different and enjoyable. It's the most rewatchable Corman-Poe collaboration despite initial confusion. Jack the Giant Killer, 1962. United Artists tried to copy the seventh voyage of Sinbad's success. They hired different stop-motion artists. The result was competent, but couldn't match Ray Harryhausen's genius. Box office flopped. The film faded into obscurity quickly. The story was essentially Sinbad with different character names. Princess needs rescuing. Hero fights monsters. Stop-motion creatures battle humans. The effects were decent, but not groundbreaking. Everything felt like second-rate Harryhausen without the master's touch or creativity. Jack the Giant Killer vanished from cultural memory, overshadowed by the films it tried to imitate. Fantasy completists rediscovered it decades later as workmanlike adventure that delivered basic entertainment without innovation. It proved Harryhausen's talent was irreplaceable. Other studios could copy the formula, but never match the artistry. The Magic Sword, 1962. Burt Gordon made low-budget fantasy with more ambition than resources. Basil Rathbone played the villain magnificently. Knights fought dragons and ogres with effects that looked cheap even in 1962. Kids loved it. Everyone else mocked it relentlessly. Gordon specialized in giant creature movies with terrible effects. The Magic Sword was his attempt at serious fantasy adventure. The budget couldn't support the vision. The dragon looked like a puppet. The ogre was obviously a man in a costume. But the story had earnest charm, and Rathbone elevated every scene. Drive-in theaters showed it for years. Mystery Science. Theater 3000 featured it lovingly, mocking the effects while respecting the ambition.
The magic sword achieved cult status through bad movie appreciation. It's charming despite limitations and proves low budgets can't kill genuine enthusiasm. The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, 1962. George Pal's passion project was shot in 3-panel Cinerama spectacle. The technical format limited distribution to specially equipped theaters. At 135 minutes, it tested patience. Box office couldn't justify the expensive production. MGM lost money on Pal's most ambitious film. The movie alternated between live-action biography of the Brothers Grimm and animated fairy tale segments. The fairy tales were gorgeous with creative special effects. The biographical framing story dragged and felt unnecessary. Audiences came for fantasy, got history lesson mixed with brief fantasy segments. Mysterious Island, 1961. Ray Harryhausen adapted Jules Verne with Civil War soldiers escaping via hot air balloon and crashing on an island with giant creatures. The giant crab attack is legendary. Bernard Herrmann's score is incredible. Box office was disappointing despite spectacular effects. Harryhausen created a giant bee, an oversized crab, and a prehistoric bird with his signature stop-motion brilliance. The adventure story was solid with good pacing and likable characters. But Mysterious Island got overshadowed by Jason and the Argonauts 2 years later, and other Harryhausen films in his filmography. The film is underrated in Harryhausen's body of work. The creature effects are as good as his more famous films. The story adapts Verne faithfully with the mystery of Captain Nemo revealed at the end. Mysterious Island deserves more recognition as prime Harryhausen adventure despite modest initial reception. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, 1958. Ray Harryhausen's first color fantasy film technically predates the 60s, but influenced the entire decade of fantasy cinema. The Cyclops fight became iconic. The dragon and skeleton sword fight showcased stop-motion genius. Box office was modest for the expensive production. Kids packed theaters for every rerun and re-release. Critics dismissed stop-motion animation as children's entertainment beneath serious consideration. Harryhausen's artistry went unappreciated by adults who couldn't see the craftsmanship and creativity in every frame. Television reruns made the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad legendary. Generations discovered it on Saturday afternoons and weekend movies. The film launched a Sinbad franchise and proved fantasy adventure could work with proper effects and imagination. Every fantasy film after owes it a debt for proving the genre commercially viable. Barbarella, 1968. Jane Fonda starred in a psychedelic space opera based on a French comic. The film was too weird for mainstream audiences. Critics destroyed it. Box office flopped. Dino De Laurentiis lost millions on his vision of sexy science fiction. Midnight movie screenings saved it from complete obscurity. College audiences discovered its campy brilliance. The visuals influenced sci-fi fashion forever. What seemed like embarrassing failure became beloved camp masterpiece. The Time Machine, 1960. George Pal adapted H.G. Wells' classic novel with Rod Taylor as the time traveler journeying to the year 800-2701. The film won the Oscar for special effects. Box office was modest, not the blockbuster MGM hoped for. Critics found it slow despite the groundbreaking time travel visualization. The sequence showing time passing through the department store window was revolutionary. Watching the mannequin's dress change through decades of fashion, buildings rising and crumbling, the sun racing across the sky. Pal created time travel effects that every film since has referenced or copied. The Morlocks terrified children with their blue skin and glowing eyes. The philosophical questions about humanity's future felt heavy for adventure audiences. Jason and the Argonauts, 1963. Ray Harryhausen's masterpiece. The skeleton fight scene where Jason battles 7 sword-wielding skeletons remains the greatest stop-motion sequence ever animated. Columbia Pictures expected bigger box office returns. Critics dismissed it as children's fantasy beneath serious consideration, and it influenced every fantasy film for the next 60 years. Harryhausen spent 4 months animating the skeleton battle alone.
Each skeleton had 5 joints per limb, requiring individual frame-by-frame manipulation coordinated with live actors. The technical achievement was unprecedented. The artistry was genius, and audiences took it for granted. The film's reputation transformed completely. What seemed like modest adventure became recognized as fantasy filmmaking at its absolute peak. Harryhausen's stop motion has never been matched for artistry and soul. Jason and the Argonauts failed to meet studio expectations and became an immortal masterpiece. Which 60s fantasy film shocked you most? Which one did you discover on television years after it bombed in theaters? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit subscribe for more film history and beautiful failures that became classics. And smash that like button if you grew up watching Ray Harryhausen's magic on lazy Saturday afternoons. Thanks for watching.